Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everybody can hear me. My name is Mike Rossetti and I'm with myLIBRO. I want to welcome you today to our data-driven decisions webinar for library systems. This is we've done a number of webinars through the last year or so here at myLIBRO. This is our first one focusing on data. And it really came about for a variety of reasons. We started talking to a number of our customers through the third and fourth quarter of last year. And one of the words we kept hearing over and over again was data. We want to become more data driven. And it was becoming apparent as we started to look at things like the ALA midwinter schedule that data was something that a lot of libraries were starting to think about. It was something that they were looking to get more out of. Obviously, you're collecting data in a number of different ways, and you're able to access that in many ways very difficultly. It's not always easy to be able to access that data, to be able to pull it from multiple data sets. So today we've collected some experts in the industry from a variety of different backgrounds and a variety of different types of libraries. So I want to go ahead and start with some introductions today, and we'll start with Katina from Mid-Continent Public Library.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Katina Jones, and Mike, thanks for inviting me to this discussion. I am currently the statistical research analyst at Mid-Continent Public Library, which is, as you might guess, in the middle of the continent, right? We serve the suburbs of Kansas City, Missouri. And so we've got 33 locations, rural, urban, and suburban branches fall under our library district. To tell you a little bit about myself, my training is in survey research. I was formerly the state data coordinator for IMLS and for the Census Bureau for the state of Missouri. That was my start in libraries a whole 12 years ago. But I've worked in the social services sector and that sort of thing. But again, survey research, that whole project management of, finding out what your customers need and delivering the goods on what they tell you, that's in my wheelhouse. So thank you and welcome everybody.
Okay, thanks, Katina. Grant Halter from Rails.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm Grant Halter, Data Analysis Manager at Rails, which stands for Reaching Across Illinois Library System. We're a system that we cover the northern half of Illinois, essentially, and we have all four types of libraries: public libraries, academic, school, and special libraries, which are usually like hospitals or law offices. We have 1,300 libraries that we work with in our membership. And we do all sorts of things to support them. We also run delivery in between the libraries as well. As for my work, I do kind of all different kinds of data work for Rails: surveys, analysis, strategic planning. I'm kind of consulting in every department of the organization, which is great. My background is I worked for a public library as a data analyst before this. Otherwise, my background is applied mathematics and anthropology, which is a great balance for libraries, kind of taking the data and actually making it useful for the organization. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks, Grant. Welcome. And Kimberly Olvares from Hussey Mayfield Memorial Public Library in Indiana.
Yes, the world's longest library name. I actually have had a promotion since I have talked to you guys, but I am now the Assistant Director of Operations. I came to libraries.
Congrats.
Thank you. It was a long time coming. I came to libraries via a career in higher education. So I have a fair amount of knowledge base, very breadth and not a lot of depth as far as survey analysis and some training in statistical analysis and whatnot. I also hold a project management certification. So I have joined the library world about 5.5 years ago, just to get my feet wet and work part-time while my kids went to school. And 5 years later, I'm actually pursuing a second master's degree in library science and the assistant director. But I do a lot of things, and currently we are a one-branch library with a very empty new bookmobile that's yet to be filled, and an outreach department that has yet to have a staff person that I will manage. So that's out there if anybody needs a job. And then we also are in the middle of building a new branch. So the data component of all of this, since we finished a strategic plan at the end of 19 to now, has been huge. And we're realizing how many holes we have in that data and various places that we're pulling information from, and that sometimes they don't always match. And you have to figure out what numbers these people are really using to get there. So it's been an interesting ride and will continue to be.
Great. Welcome, Kimberly. I love that you're recruiting on a webinar too. Always a good idea.
Sorry.
No, that's great.
I have no grace whatsoever.
I love it. I love it. Good. And I'd like to introduce our CEO and co-founder of myLIBRO and our parent company, Conversate.ai, Ganesh Gandeshwaran.
Thank you, Mike. Glad to meet all of you. So my role primarily in this space is how to get all this data and make this real. Right, so that from a technology side, so that's what, as a company, Conversate, we are building that conversationally how we can interact with this data. I think all of you are, alluding to the challenges on the data. So how do we make that real? That's my role. Thank you, Mike.
Great. Thanks, Ganesh. And we'll talk for about a minute at the very end of the webinar just about myLIBRO and our Insights platform that we've recently brought into the library space. We'll give you a little bit of background on that in case there's an interest, in case you would like to follow up. So like I said, I'm Mike from myLIBRO. I'm the director of sales here. Just a couple housekeeping items before we jump in. We really want this to be a true roundtable and a true group discussion. So feel free to try to enhance your webinar experience as much as possible. We do have a chat feature within Zoom. We love when questions come in. We love when there's feedback amongst participants. So if you hear something that resonates with you or that you would like to add some input to, please share that in the chat. When we get to a break, we'll share some of those thoughts and bring up those questions as well. Also, we will be sharing a video recording when this is over. So for anybody that registered wasn't able to make it, or if you'd like to share it with other members of your organization, we certainly welcome that and encourage that. So as I mentioned in the intro, one of the things, the reason we decided to do this today, and we'll probably do several more of these throughout the year, is data has really become a hot button in the library space. I think there were at least 4 or 5 sessions that I saw at midwinter. I know a lot of the state library conferences that are coming up are spending time helping libraries to better understand everything that exists and all the opportunities that are out there for you in your ILS and your door count data and your program data, all these other data sets that are sometimes siloed in the library space and really need to be used to help you make better decisions going forward, not just from a budget perspective, but also just in planning, positioning, and how to set up your program calendars and lots of other ideas like that. I'm going to let our panelists talk much more about that today because they're the experts, and I'm just sharing anecdotal stories that I'm hearing in conversations with our customer throughout the year. These are just some of the statistics that we found as we emerged from COVID and we started talking to our customers and to prospects. We learned, obviously, COVID really changed the game in terms of how libraries were doing business, both in the academic and the public space. It really, I think, showed the need for digital resources, maybe more so than ever, and put an emphasis on those like have never been seen before in the library space. And what we found is a number of our customers and a lot of our prospects still didn't know how to get that information out of data. So that's something that obviously we felt the need to share some expert opinions today to help you get better information out of that data that you're collecting. So let's jump right in, get this over to our panelists and let them do the majority of the speaking the rest of the way. Again, please share your questions and thoughts in the chat as well. So I'm going to start with Katina. And Katina, what opportunities do you see for libraries to use their ILS data to better engage patrons and students and better position products and services?
Thanks, Mike. When I think about this, getting the most out of your ILS data, obviously the first thing that comes to mind is remembering, customer privacy, because, we could go way off the deep end and Amazon all of our customers, not to use a word that I shouldn't say, but I think in reality, for me as a person who works at a public library, a person who does a lot of data analysis, I'm always weighing that with, just not going too far, right? So I start my statement by saying that. But I here at Midcontinent, we've got what I call a data visualization vendor that we work with, and how that's helped us really is taking a lot of data, because a couple years ago we circulated 7 million physical items, right? That's a lot of items to understand where they got checked, the location they got checked out from, the type of, whether it was a book or a CD or a DVD, those sorts of things. Those little pieces of information that help you better serve your customers if you understand what's going out the door and who, or the profile type, patron type, that's actually using it. So one of the things that I've often looked at in the ILS data is understanding, looking at circulation usage by profile type. I'll call it profile type, like whether it's a student, whether it's a teacher, whether it's someone, and then also taking that, that profile type. And I apologize, I use my hands a lot, so I'm going to put them down just for a second. But taking that profile type, understanding, that's the way to understand who's actually using your services, right? But then you can also create a who based on the type of items they use, right? Whether they are pretty much just checking out books, or pretty much just checking out music and movies from the library, that sort of thing. And so all of that is readily available for you, right, in your ILS. So it's just sort of getting that out and slicing and dicing it in ways to help you, whether it's a level of reader's advisory. Maybe you've got a method for people to have, a profile on your website, right? And if they opt in, like I like mysteries, or I want to be able to see which programs are available at my local branch, then you can deliver that content also. And again, that's a sort of a separate, but it could be related to your ILS. Again, if you take that other step, like, you see that they are checking out mostly books, you could change, the books that you show in a book river on that page for that particular customer. So I think it's the nature of your question, Mike, I think is, there's so much data in the ILS. How do you make the most of it? And like I said, even without a data visualization vendor, making sure that you can, run reports out of your ILS based on where things are getting checked out, which types of activities are happening at which branches. If you're like me, we've got 33. It's not surprising that we've got an area that mostly they're checking out books, because there's a lot of seniors that live in that area. You know what I mean? Like, you can divvy all that sort of thing out of your ILS. So again, understanding your patron type, or the profile type of the people, and divvying out those students versus teachers versus parents, that sort of thing. But also understanding those last activity location where people are using it. That's the kind of data that I think can help even those folks that don't have a data visualization vendor to understand how their community is using their library, especially if they have multiple branches. But I think I'm jumping ahead on that one, so I'll come back to that later.
Yeah, great thoughts though. Grant, Kimberly, Ganesh, anything that you'd like to add to that?
I can jump in. Yeah, I 100% agree with everything Katina shared, and I'll also mention when you're grouping your patrons by that activity type or by that usage type, kind of what profiles they fit in. One other kind of data point that I love to look at when I was at the public library, I love this, was looking at the frequency of usage by patrons at the library. You could see what type of patron, what kind of category of patron comes in once a week to the library, who comes once a month, who comes irregularly, sporadically, and that can give you a lot of insight in terms of how to develop those displays or different services based on who's in your library, electronic e-content most frequently versus coming in versus doing programs. So that can give you a lot of insight about the activity of the patrons and what they're doing when they're coming to the building.
And the only thing I would add is that we are currently part of a consortium of libraries that uses Evergreen, and I find the reporting feature of that very hard to manage. So if you have any say in what ILS your library or system is picking, think very long and very hard about what you want to track and whether or not it'll allow you to do that easily in-house without extensive training, because it's Doing it on the other side is very much a challenge.
Great points. Great. Perfect. If
I'll
there's any
hop in
feedback.
one more, sorry.
Yep, go ahead, great. No problem.
I also want to mention I had a lot of conversations with the technical services, specifically about ILS data and the catalogers and how we can different things and cleaning up data, because a lot of times good data, well, every time good data in to the ILS, it gives you good data out. So if there are discrepancies in how books are categorized or how that data is input, that can kind of skew results and kind of give you some misleading answers. So being really diligent about the kind of information that is shared. If you have special fields, especially if you're in a consortium, those fields can get pulled in a bunch of different directions by those libraries that might have stronger, more vocal technical services groups. So making sure you're always kind of you have a handle on what data you need out of that ILS, and make sure that on the front end it's being added or included appropriately.
Good point. And Grant, I know we also have a number, your organization represents a number of academic libraries, and I know we have some attendees from the academic space on this call today. So I want to make sure too that we're focusing not just on public libraries, but also maybe, what are some of the ways that your group is maybe seeing academic libraries use data to position services, and also maybe to better utilize how to maximize their offerings in the university and college level setting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So like all libraries, there's a ton of data. So at this point, you're kind of beyond that planning stage, and you're ready to review this data of what services you have, and you're looking to make those changes. So the first thing that jumps to my mind when we talk about this is, what are the patterns and trends across the system? If you're combining a bunch of different components or data systems, how are you pulling that together? You would want to look at kind of the chart of activity in the library, the visits, the computer uses, the checkouts, the study rooms, but not just those total numbers. You want to look at kind of what are the peaks and valleys, what outside trends are going to be impacting those pieces. Was there the example I always use was Eclipse Day. Was that 3 years ago, 2018, the horror day for most public libraries, or probably most libraries, is that spiked our data, visit data, checkout data, everything. That was just a wild event. And while that might not be the most important thing, because that's kind of a one-off, but those peaks and go up a lot more often than you might expect. So I'm always looking at what are those trends, what are those patterns that don't quite look that kind of jump out on the page. And once I see those, I'm always asking the staff, I'm asking the patrons about those exact dates. Okay, I saw a peak in the data, in the usage data, the visits data. What was going on there? What were you doing? What was the mood of the library? Oftentimes the kind of front desk staff have the most insight of anyone in the library. They match up with, they know what's going on before I even tell them what my data results were. They already know. I remember one time I asked someone at the desk what percentage of people use the self-checkouts versus manual checkouts. They said about 70 to 75% of people use self-checkout in that library, and they were dead on without me even sharing the data. So there's a lot of insight in the people that are in patrons, and can know what the pulse of the library is. So there's a lot of insight there that you can pull in new data, kind of the anecdotal data. Also, this information can also, looking at these patterns and trends, can also help tell you what you should stop doing. If you're seeing low traffic or low interaction, what's driving that? You want to ask those questions. It's a lot easier to start something new than to get rid of an existing program. I know that can be really difficult, but looking at the different data and patterns can help you kind of pivot to something that'll be more effective, more kind of optimizing your resources. What else did I have here? love asking patrons and staff. That's my big one for kind of repositioning those services. What are you missing? What have you done for so long that you don't even question it anymore? That's where the data can help and kind of uncover those new trends and patterns.
Great. Anything from Katina or Kimberly? Anything I'd like to add to that?
I think the only thing that I would add, and I agree with Grant, that those people, the folks on your staff that are delivering the services, they have such a different, they see things differently, better maybe than you do just looking at the numbers. And so for me, trying to make sure that I deliver to them also is important, right? I don't need to just deliver the results of what I see to, excuse me, the senior leadership team. Those frontline folks need to also, it helps them to validate, what they're seeing, right? And so I think that's equally as important if we're talking about how to deliver that analysis that you're making of the data. They need to know too.
Great, good point. I think Grant brought up something interesting too. We work with Iowa State, University of Iowa, a number of other academic partners too. And I think one of the things that they've tried to really jump on recently, especially, is the anomalies that exist in the data from 2020. We've heard from a lot of our customers that 2020 in many ways was a huge data anomaly, and going back and trying to look at that historical data several years from now, gain insights from that, remember why things happened, is going to be a challenge. So I think finding platforms or being able to really maximize your capability to look for ways to annotate those trends, those anomalies, I think is going to be critical for a lot of libraries going forward. Any other thoughts on academic, on some of those the program or some of the positioning of services for anybody, or otherwise we'll move on to another question.
I'll kind of summarize where my brain was going. I think a little bit where Katina was talking about is what we're really trying to get is you can only learn so much from looking at the data, but getting in the mind of your target audience is the goal. You're not going to see everything from that data. So talking to the desk staff, talking to the patrons and the students will help connect the dots to what the data is actually telling you.
Great point. Those anecdotes are critical. Kimberly, let's jump over. So we're going to talk a little bit about program data now, because this really exists across certainly all library platforms. What kind of data do you all collect from programming, and how do you use that to maybe determine future scheduling and planning when you're putting programs together for coming years? Obviously, programs have been different for this past year, but we're hopefully coming into better times, and we're going to see some new trends emerging there too.
Yeah, so seems to be it was about a year ago that my inbox started blowing up with items from my state library about how to count virtual programs and whether or not you counted them one time or if they watched them again next month. And I just at some point just shut down. I was like, I can't take it anymore. I'll figure it out when I have to do my annual report, which actually was fine in the end, but it was a little overwhelming as we all faced that and how to count things. And I think, again, 2020 is basically, I just call it the asterisk year. It's going to have a big asterisk by everything that's designated as collected in 2020. We currently collect the number of programs by department and attendance numbers by department. Youth Services has a little bit of different attendance because they also track how many children, teens that got dragged along and adults attend. And so there's a little bit more of a data points there than what the other departments have for themselves. And then there's still a lot of crossover between, we've got tweens that in our library are designated as youth services, but we don't stop anybody from going and taking a take and make kit from the teen side. So it's not perfect. I will say that my higher ed background, in a perfect world where everybody would just follow my directions, we would implement the project outcomes and actually be not only using the data to drive our programming and what we're doing and where we're doing it and how we're delivering it, what mechanism we're using, whether it's online or in person or outside or with a partner or whatever, but also that we're being very strategic and using what we want that outcome to be, and using that to plan and kind of do it in reverse. And it, I haven't made that culture shift yet. And I'm really hoping with the addition of some new staff and the new branch when it launches, that might be a good time to make the switch as a whole unit. So we'll see, fingers crossed. But also again, in 2020, we left, we closed and shuttered basically March the 13th of last year, and we're gone for 2.5 months. And at that point, then shifted a lot of our resources from buying materials to online resources. And our particular community, I had just finished about 6 months before our benchmarking report for our annual, or for our strategic report. And our community uses a lot more digital resources than the average. By and large, it's a very affluent community. They can go and buy and do whatever they want when they want it. So they're looking at us more of an enrichment and entertainment focus, as opposed to a place to learn and get skills and go out and take on the world. So when 2020 started, we made that shift and we spent a lot of money, and we have not seen the downside of that yet. Like we haven't seen the numbers with like Hoopla usage, and usually it's Hoopla go down. Things are still either level or they're still growing, even though things are somewhat returning to normal for most of us, at least in the Midwest, where we just ignore science. And so, oh, was that out loud? Sorry. So it's hard to say what 2020 numbers will lead. And right now we're having a discussion of, we still have patrons that are using lots of usages, and especially with the pay-per-use items that are costing us money, but we don't want to back down from those because we don't want to inconvenience our patrons, especially in our particular community. And but how to fund those and still grow our collection of physical items, because people don't want to walk in a library when they do come in and not see books, because that's all we have in a library, that's all we're for. And so they still want all of the old things, but they want all the new things too. And so how to balance that, and also then the staff's ownership of that collection and the collection development. And most library people went in because we all thought we were going to sit around and read books all the time. And at least we get to buy them. But now, we're buying movies and things that aren't traditional. So trying to figure out that ownership piece of, well, I'm the collection development person and I need to buy so many books, there's a percentage of the budget, and getting them to shift and look at the collection as a whole with all of the different types of materials and collections, and meeting the need for a specific, need for, classics, whether that be in video or streaming services or large print or audio or whatever. And as long as we have it in some capacity, we will likely be okay. So.
A lot of good points there, I think. Katina, kind of along those lines, one of the things Kimberly brought up, obviously looking at the resources, looking at staffing, a lot of adjustments are being made coming out of COVID. How does data maybe influence your planning of both staffing and servicing, especially when you're dealing with a multiple branch library system like yours? And I guess the other thing that we can look at is how that can be improved going forward.
Right. I think for us, at MidCon, we started a major capital improvements campaign in 2018, right? And so one of the things that I did to try and help, our senior leadership team, but the people who are making decisions about which branches to close when and which neighbors, will have to be the overflow branch, right? I did a lot of looking, and with that, I was looking at how many people are doing certain things. How many people use this branch to check out physical items? How many people use this branch to come to story time and check out children's material? How many people use this branch to use computers? That being the biggest one, right? We have, there are a couple of branches that are heavy, that are for heavy users of computers. And so the thought process around that is, okay, where are we going to redirect those folks? If those branches are in our urban area, is there a bus line that will take people to this other branch that we're telling them to use? Do we have enough computers at that other branch to, to support the number of people that need to be, redirected while their branch is under construction? So a lot of those data points are available to me, again, because we use Envisionware for our computer software, and we know which computer is being used and the naming of the computer. This is the Antioch branch, laptop number 3. It's easy, a data point that I can just pull out of those reports, not necessarily what the report's spitting out to me, but it's a way that I can sort of analyze that data to understand where computers are being used, and then consider, things like construction, consider things like staffing based on how people are using that location. And I think with that, yes, I'm talking from a public library, but I think that also is a useful point to consider, to what Grant said earlier, for academic libraries. If you've got several, different libraries, understanding how many people are actually using this library to just study, or this, library location to ask lots of questions, right? So again, that's where you're staffing and understanding how that data, how you, move people around, or, adjust. I don't want to say adjust your focus, because, in a public library sense, we're going to offer all of our services at all of our locations. But, how much do you have to support as far as people resources, staff resources, because that there's 30 people a day that come in and use these computers, and 25 of them don't have any questions, they just come and use it. But, or the opposite, 25 of them have lots of questions, need lots of help, that sort of thing. So to me, that's the staffing model that we have been using. And so again, when now, post-COVID, how does that look? We've got I feel like we're starting fresh, right? Of understanding who's coming to the library to do what. There's a level of excitement that I have, of trying to figure out, okay, how are people going to use libraries now? Because we had this picture, we've got this, this beautiful oil painting of how people usually use this branch, that branch, and those down south. But how is it going to look once we actually return to 100% services available to the public? So
I think that's a great point. And that's something that exists regardless of the type of library you are, how big your staff is. Everybody's facing those different challenges. The numbers might be different, but they're facing the same challenges, obviously. So
right. And so having a baseline understanding of where you were, right. Again, it's that whole thing. We're going to be pre-COVID, in the before times and now. So
yeah, sure, certainly. Great. Well, I want to kind of shift the focus a little bit. Obviously, we've spent a lot of time talking about how things have been done, where we're going. I want to start maybe looking at some opportunities, because I think a lot of our attendees today here, people that'll be watching the recording, obviously are interested on where you go from here. So Grant, generally speaking, where do you say libraries, both public and academic, are kind of missing out when it comes to data? What opportunities are out there? How can they start to maximize that? Obviously, we could talk about this for hours, but if you can give us kind of a quick overview, I think that would be a great way to help some of our participants today.
Yeah, absolutely. So my first note in terms of self-preservation is hire a data analyst. That'll make all this a lot easier and more effective. So hire a data analyst, yeah. Besides that, I'd say I see a big disconnect in terms of the data collected by libraries and the strategic plan. A lot of libraries, like we've said, have a lot of data, and they have great written strategic plans, but the bridge kind of falls between those a lot of times in terms of turning that data into change or actionable steps to achieve those impacts that you want for your community. That's a big thing. You need the right data. Good data in is good data out, and you need to ask the right questions of your data to see if they're showing if the change in the patron or the community is happening, so that you can kind of fulfill those strategic plan initiatives. And one other quick thing is, it's popped up in my head a lot during our conversation, is libraries are missing out when it comes to creativity when using their data. My example earlier of looking at the timing of patron usage, and how frequently people come into the library. That data just came out of looking at what libraries are currently doing and kind of taking a right turn to see how else can we kind of take advantage of this information in a way that hasn't been used traditionally in libraries. So thinking outside the box with all of this data will kind of help you get that step up to make the most of it, and to really impress your board, impress the community with some of the insights you can get if you really kind of dig into those numbers.
Great points. I think you summed that up well. You know, Kimberly, one of the things that Graham mentioned too was I think a lot of the libraries of all different sizes are still having a tough time getting their arms around how to best use that data. What all the power and the value that really lies, you know, within all those numbers and those metrics that exist in all those systems. So where do you see value maybe in being able to compare like your library's live data to some of the publicly available data sets that are out there, whether it's census data, public library survey, information you're getting from your state libraries, those types of things?
So I don't know that there's an easy answer. I have kind of fallen backwards into even my current job, which has been my lifelong career trajectory. But I found it incredibly telling and insightful when I had to do the benchmarking process. And if you haven't done that, I would encourage you to do that, even if you just set a couple of data points that you want information on, because being able to manipulate that data that comes from the IMLS site and the public, what is it, PLS, I've forgotten my acronyms, it's alphabet soup now. But
you got it.
pulling that down and being able to manipulate it in Excel, and it's not nearly as scary as what you might think. But I would encourage, if you have an interest in looking at the data, to go in and play with it a little bit, not be afraid of it. I'm really curious as to what the census is going to come out when we actually see numbers. In my particular area, we've seen a lot of growth in the last decade, and people moving in. And then, like I said, we've just added a service territory, and we're adding a branch out there. So being able to pull from existing census and state data, and we're very blessed in Indiana that IU has a lot of houses a lot of data and makes it available to people so that we can manipulate it and use it for good, hopefully. And so we've been able to use that's more current than, you know, the 2010 census data. Sometimes though, like I alluded to early on, is that it's really challenging to see what the numbers are that the state is reporting versus the census versus what maybe have been reported at an annual report from libraries. So being cognizant that it's not necessarily all the same and really understanding what those numbers mean, but to get in and play with it and see. For us right now, we're making a lot of use cases and just trying to make a case for the value of a library and how big it needs to be, and the trajectory of the new community that we're growing into, and how much growth that they've seen over the last decade, and the projection of what that's going to look like in 20 years before the bonds go up again. And we have to, you know, we're looking at expanding or building or adding another branch. So as opposed to giving them a library now that is undersized, we'd rather give them a library that's bigger that they can grow into instead of immediately out of. So using those numbers to make those cases. And for instance, after I get off with you, I get to finish my fine free proposal, because a year ago we went fine free finally, but only through the end of 2020, and then only through June 30 of 2021. And I can't see how they're going to make it back walk it back because it would just be a PR nightmare at this point, but I still have to make the case, and I have to do that with data. And I have to do it with data that basically has that big giant 2020 asterisk hanging over it. So just being able to understand that and work within the confines of what we have.
Katina, Grant, anything to add to that? Any other thoughts?
I was, I'm like, okay, Katina, you're going to say something else about this. I was so excited, but ultimately that has been my mission of helping libraries understand who they don't see, right? So you look at that community data to know, okay, looking at the community data coupled with your, what you're seeing in your ILS or what you're seeing as far as people who are actually coming in and utilizing your services, and then figuring out that gap, really that's helping you to understand. And so to what Kimberly said, yes, you've got to, figure out the best data. Yes, you got to figure out which, geographies to use, all that kind of thing. But you should do it, right? Because it really helps you to understand your community, helps you to understand the potential for who could use your services. And the other thing that I pitch often is, especially for smaller libraries or oddly shaped libraries like ours, use what's available, what data available to you in the community. Like we did population projections. Katina didn't have to create those projections, right? We've got our regional planning commission that created they did the project for the transportation department, but yet that data was available to me of population projections at the census tract level. And that helped us to understand, okay, should we move a branch, when we were starting this construction project? So utilize the data that's available to you in the community, just like what Kimberly was describing, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just be creative and go out and find data that you can use and help you to deliver your library services better. So
100% agreed. Mapping data is also incredibly useful. Any kind of GIS software or map tool can really hit home with whoever your stakeholders are to kind of drive home those points.
Mike, you are on mute.
Thank you, Ganesh. One of the things I wanted to ask too, I think we have a number of IT people that are on this call with us. I think we've talked a lot about strategy. We've talked a lot about opportunities, challenges, things like that. But from a technical standpoint, what are some of the challenges and maybe some of the technical opportunities to kind of achieving this vision and putting a plan together?
Yeah, so within this call, I heard some, first, Katina, you started with, privacy is so critical, we can't. But then when Grant started talking about, you started about, we need to find the frequency of the same pattern coming in. Well, how do you achieve that? So that's where the challenge is. So how do we bring all these valuable insights from different data? Some are captured within your ILS, some are like counting the doors, Wi-Fi usage, computer usage, and some are external data. And each one is going to come in different formats. Some are you have to go download an Excel file, some you can go read it from a database. So the challenge start for us from a technical side, I can say that, is how do we bring all the data together without compromising security and without putting too much load and performance? And then how easy it's for us to use this. And who's going to use this is like people not really, they don't have a lot of time to be in front of the computer and browse through the Excels and pivots and all that. How quickly and easily you can consume the data. So that's kind of my challenge start from a technology side is variety of data and security, and then presenting it back to all of you with ease of use. I think that's kind of, I would summarize that. How do we do that in a easier way? That's kind of one example I can talk about, right? So last year when we started talking about this entire scheduling data, I've seen firsthand, like, you go give a scheduling and some patron would say in the comments they were putting like, oh, I don't have any books, but I want to pick up some books. And can you just pick up something, right? And we read that, like 500 people were telling that, like, you give me whatever book. And we were working with one library and we called a surprise bag. So that's what they were asking for. So we were able to introduce a service within the pickup scheduling, It's called surprise back. The staff will pick up the best one, and then, okay, you give me the stuff next, 200 comments where you give me the surprise back. I'm so happy, but can you also give me for kids? Can you also give me? So the data was kind of telling us what kind of services we need to offer. So loved it, when that data can be used and customize your service and go from there. So that's about it, Mike.
Perfect. Well, I know we're pretty close to our time, but I want to give our panelists, if there's any closing thoughts, we'd just love to hear any closing thoughts, maybe advice for our libraries that are on the call today, are going to be listening to the recording. What are your thoughts, maybe just in 30 seconds or less? Katina, what would you recommend a library looking to try to really jump in and start to put a plan together? What would you suggest to them?
I think in 30 seconds, I think that the best thing to do is, we talked about strategic plans today. We talked about, having to make these decisions because you need to deliver services differently. I think it really is to go with Grant said, hire data analysts, but in reality, work with your local regional planning commissions, work with your state libraries, if you don't have the resources on hand. But the other point is making sure that you, understand your data, that whole what goes in so that you can interpret what comes out, I think is probably the best place to start, and make sure that you've got that. Maybe it's just a couple data points, make sure you've got that squared away, and that'll make a world of difference to understand those peaks and valleys and what those mean.
Great advice. Grant?
Yeah, so my best advice is hire data analyst. Second piece is, if you don't have a strategic plan, write a strategic plan. If you already have a strategic plan, can you transform that into a logic model format? And if you don't know what that is, start Googling it. It's great. It'll change your life. And then your final little helpful tip for people who struggle to write surveys that are useful and actionable surveys: take your goals for, especially programming, if you have goals written out for programs, or if you have those strategic objectives, take those statements and write them in a survey question and call it a day.
Yep.
Perfect. Kimberly?
So I think, other than what I said earlier, just jumping in and doing it. Like I said, even if you just are looking and going to take a deep dive on a one or two data points, being able to work with it, not be afraid of it, is really important, especially for those of us that maybe aren't data analysts but still need to do it, and it's one of those other duties as assigned. And I tell you, you can really get your geek on when you start looking at all the numbers. It's really interesting what you can tell about your community and your users, and what changes you need to make, and what modifications, and where to spend dollars. It's really an interesting story.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank all of our attendees today for being here with us. Here at myLIBRO, we've made it our mission over the past 3 years to help libraries. I think COVID last year was one time where we were especially able to continually roll out enhancements, features to both our patron-facing app, and then bring forward our new Insights module that's available. Feel free to check us out on our website, mylibro.com, and we would love to speak with anyone that's looking for some help in getting started with a data plan. Short of hiring a data analyst, if you can't afford that, we do have a great self-service platform that can even help your data analyst if it's something that they're looking to get more information on. I would love to chat with you. But thank you all for being here today, and we will be sending out the recording, and look forward to further webinars coming from myLIBRO in the future. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.